The sharp, insistent ring of my phone echoed through the quiet house, pulling me out of a peaceful Sunday afternoon. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the school's health center number on the screen. I'd been expecting a routine check-in for my daughter, Sophie, who suffered from a rare respiratory condition that required constant monitoring. But this call was different. There was an edge in the nurse's voice, a subtle tremor that immediately set my nerves on edge. "Mrs. Marshall, we need you to come in immediately. Sophie, she's not doing well." My stomach dropped. I didn't even think to ask for details. I grabbed my coat and rushed out the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. The school wasn't far, but the drive felt like an eternity. Every second that passed made the pit in my stomach grow deeper. What was happening to my daughter? Was she okay? Had something gone horribly wrong? I arrived at the school's health center, barely registering. The staff member who greeted me at the door. My eyes locked onto Sophie, lying in a small bed, her frail form barely noticeable beneath the white hospital sheet. But something was terribly wrong. Her normally rosy cheeks were pale, her lips tinged with blue. She was gasping for air, each breath a labored struggle. Panic surged through me, and I immediately rushed to her side. "Sophie?" I whispered, my voice trembling with fear. She looked up at me with wide, frightened eyes. The oxygen mask, which she depended on to keep her breathing steady, was nowhere to be found. Instead, a brightly colored balloon, the kind you'd find at a birthday party, was tied in place where the tank should have been. I froze for a split second, my mind struggling to comprehend the sight before me. A balloon. What in the world was going on? I turned to the nurse standing awkwardly in the corner of the room. She was shifting her weight from one foot to the other, unable to meet my gaze. Her face was a mask of confusion, but I could tell she was hiding something. I swallowed hard, my throat dry with fury. "What happened to Sophie's oxygen tank?" I demanded, my voice cold and demanding. She stammered, her words coming out in a jumble. I don't know, Mrs. Marshall. I thought she was fine, but there must have been some mistake. I was just following orders." "Orders? Who gave you the order to replace my daughter's oxygen with a balloon?" My voice cracked with disbelief. How could something like this happen? How could they have made such a reckless, dangerous mistake? The nurse couldn't answer me. Instead, she looked at the door, her eyes darting nervously as if she was waiting for someone to come to her rescue. I didn't wait for her to say anything else. My eyes were fixed on Sophie, her condition worsening with each passing second. The balloon. How could anyone think it would serve as a replacement for medical oxygen? I could already see the consequences of this mistake. Sophie's breathing was growing more erratic, more shallow. I grabbed the balloon, desperate to replace it with the oxygen mask that should have been there in the first place. But before I could act, I heard a voice behind me. "Is everything all right?" The voice was too calm, too smooth. I turned to see Karen, the school's parent volunteer, standing in the doorway with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was one of the most involved parents at the school. Always around, always hovering, and always just a little too eager to help. Her presence here made my skin crawl. Karen's eyes flicked nervously to Sophie, then back to me. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," she said with a voice too sweet, too rehearsed. "We're doing everything we can for her. There must be some confusion." A chill ran down my spine. There was something about Karen's demeanor that made my blood run cold. She was hiding something. I could feel it in my bones. I turned back to Sophie, my heart breaking at the sight of her trying to breathe through the balloon that was doing nothing to help. The panic inside me reached a boiling point, but I knew I had to stay calm. If Sophie was going to make it through this, I couldn't lose my head. I rushed to the nurse, demanding that she administer oxygen immediately, but the nurse stood frozen, her hands trembling. "Where is the oxygen?" I demanded again. I don't know," she mumbled. We just, we just didn't have enough. We thought the balloon could... I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A balloon? This was no time for childish excuses. My daughter was gasping for air, and all they could offer me was this nonsense. My thoughts were spinning out of control. Was this carelessness, negligence, or something worse? With no time left to waste, I grabbed my phone and called Sophie's specialist. The line rang endlessly, my frustration building with each unanswered second. My mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. Who had replaced the oxygen? Why hadn't they informed me of a shortage? Why was Sophie left without the proper care? Then, a thought hit me. Could Karen be involved in this? She had. Been overseeing things in the health center recently, and her strange behavior was starting to make sense. But I needed proof. I couldn't just accuse her based on a gut feeling. I needed to get to the bottom of this, and I needed to do it fast. The nurse, still avoiding my gaze, finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Marshall. I'm not sure what happened. I'll go get the oxygen right away." But the damage was done. Sophie's condition had worsened, and it was clear this was more than just an unfortunate accident. Something was off, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I wouldn't rest until I knew who was responsible for putting my daughter in harm's way. As I sat by Sophie's side, watching her struggle to breathe, a wave of determination washed over me. This wasn't just about my daughter anymore. This was about exposing the truth, no matter how far I had to go to uncover it. And I would do whatever it took to protect Sophie from the people who had failed her. The worst had happened, but the real battle was just beginning. I stormed out of the health center, Sophie's fragile condition still weighing heavily on my mind. The nurse's apologies echoed in my ears, but they were hollow, meaningless. My eyes burned with frustration, and every part of me screamed for answers. I wasn't just a mother watching her child suffer. I was a prosecutor, trained to uncover the truth no matter how deeply it was buried, and I would not let this go. Not now. Not ever. I walked briskly down the hall toward the principal's office. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind was racing with questions. Who was behind this? Was it incompetence, or was it something far worse? And why hadn't anyone told me sooner that something was wrong? I could feel my anger rising, each step fueled by a sense of injustice. No one was going to get away with this. When I entered the principal's office, I was met with a tense silence. Mr. Mitchell, the principal, was sitting behind his desk, his brow furrowed in concern. His eyes flicked toward me as I walked in, and I didn't wait for him to speak. My voice came out sharp and commanding. "Where is Karen?" I demanded. "The woman in charge of the health center. I need to speak with her now." Mr. Mitchell hesitated for a moment before standing up. "She's just down the hall, but, Mrs. Marshall, Now, I interrupted, cutting him off. "I need answers, and I need them from her." I could see the hesitation in his eyes, but he nodded and motioned for me to follow him. We walked down the corridor, and I could hear the muffled sounds of children's voices in the classrooms. It felt like the whole world was moving in slow motion, but I had no time to waste. I had to confront Karen, and I had to do it now. When we reached the small office, Karen was seated at a desk, her smile as wide as ever. She looked up at us with an expression that could only be described as feigned innocence. But there was something about her smile that didn't sit right with me. It was too perfect, too rehearsed, like she had practiced it 1,000 times. "Mrs. Marshall, Karen began, her voice sugary sweet, but I cut her off. "I need to know why my daughter was given a balloon instead of an oxygen tank," I snapped, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "I want an explanation, and I want it now." Karen's eyes flicked to Mr. Mitchell, and for a brief moment, I saw something pass between them, an exchange I couldn't quite decipher. She hesitated, clearly caught off guard by my directness, but then her expression softened, and she sat back in her chair. "It must have been a misunderstanding, Mrs. Marshall," she said. her voice dripping with faux concern. There was some confusion with the medical supplies. The oxygen tank was misplaced, and we thought the balloon would do for a short time. I could hear the words coming out of her mouth, but they didn't make sense. A balloon? For a child with a severe respiratory condition? The absurdity of it all made my blood boil. I clenched my fists at my sides, trying to keep my composure, but the more I listened to Karen, the more I realized she was lying. The story didn't add up. Misplaced? I repeated slowly, my voice low but deadly. Karen, you're telling me that you thought a balloon was an acceptable replacement for medical oxygen? Her smile faltered for just a second, but then she quickly recovered. I understand how it sounds, but it was an honest mistake. We're all doing the best we can under the circumstances. The school has been dealing with some budget cuts, and resources are stretched thin. I could see the cracks in her story forming, and I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. So, the balloon was your best solution for the situation, I pressed, because a proper oxygen tank was out of reach? Karen opened her mouth to respond, but I could see the shift in her expression. The mask was starting to slip. She was trying to maintain control, but the more I pushed, the harder it was for her to keep up the act. She hesitated, and that hesitation was all I needed. I could feel the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. Look, I can assure you, Karen continued, her voice tightening with nervousness. We've been working with a new medical supplier. They're supposed to be delivering better equipment for the school, but there's been some delays. Delays? I repeated, narrowing my eyes. What kind of delays? Her face paled slightly, and she avoided my gaze. It's not something I can discuss openly, she said, her tone dropping to a whisper. But the school has been looking for ways to cut costs, and some of these suppliers have been part of that plan. The room seemed to grow colder as her words sank in. Cut costs? New suppliers? My suspicions were growing by the second. I could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on me, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook just yet. There was something more here, something deeper than just a simple mistake. I needed to dig further. Who exactly are you working with? I asked, my voice sharp. Which supplier is it? And what does this have to do with my daughter's health? Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting toward Mr. Mitchell, who was standing off to the side, watching the exchange in silence. He hadn't spoken up yet, and something about his quiet presence made me uneasy. Was he complicit in all of this? Was he part of whatever scheme Karen was involved in? After a long pause, Karen finally spoke, but her voice was lower now, as if she didn't want anyone else to hear. It's not a big deal, she muttered. Just a small company. They've been providing some of the equipment for the school's health center. Their name is Biomed Health Supplies. I froze, my mind racing. Biomed Health Supplies. The name rang a bell, but I couldn't place it immediately. I needed to look into it, needed to find out more. But as I turned to leave, Karen added something else, something that made my stomach drop. I think the school's budget cuts have something to do with it, she whispered, almost too quietly for me to hear. There's pressure from higher up. They've been telling us to keep costs down, even if it means cutting corners. Cutting corners. I felt a surge of anger at the thought. Sophie's life had been put at risk because of a financial decision? How could anyone justify that? I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I turned to face Mr. Mitchell. I'll be looking into this, I said, my voice cold. And I won't stop until I get the answers I deserve. You can't hide behind budget cuts and lies. As I walked out of the office, I knew I had uncovered just the beginning of something much larger. Someone was responsible for putting my daughter's life in danger, and I would not rest until they were held accountable. I had my work cut out for me, but I was ready for whatever came next. I had been a prosecutor for years, trained to see through lies and uncover the truth. But this case felt deeply personal. The violation was no longer just a question of legal proceedings. It was about protecting my daughter, about ensuring that no other child would suffer because of someone else's greed. The anger that burned inside me wasn't just from the injustice Sophie had faced. It was from knowing that someone like Karen could manipulate a system designed to protect our children for personal gain. As I walked out of the school, my mind whirled with the weight of the conversation I just had with Karen. The words Biomed Health Supplies echoed in my mind, but there was something about the way she said it, hesitant, almost ashamed, that set off alarm bells. I had to know more about this supplier, and I had to move fast. My first call was to a colleague who had worked with me on several fraud cases. Detective Sarah Jennings was a no-nonsense investigator with a sharp mind and an even sharper intuition. She didn't hesitate when I called, and within minutes, we were discussing the next steps. We dove deep into Karen's background, uncovering a tangled web of shady dealings. Sarah had connections in the city's investigative offices, and within hours, she'd pulled up a list of companies that Karen had been affiliated with. One name kept popping up, Biomed Health Supplies. It seemed like an innocent enough name at first, but as we dug further, we found that the company had a history of supplying low-quality, often expired medical products to schools and hospitals across the state. Several reports from whistleblowers described the company's practices as questionable at best, and there were rumors about them skirting regulations and shipping subpar equipment to schools like the one Sophie attended. It became clear that Karen wasn't just some well-meaning volunteer who made an unfortunate mistake. No, she had been involved in something far more sinister. She had used the school as a front for distributing defective medical supplies, oxygen tanks, nebulizers, even the very oxygen masks that Sophie had relied on. I could feel my pulse quicken as I processed this information. Sophie wasn't just the victim of a simple error. She had been part of a larger, more insidious scheme that was putting children's lives at risk, and I was going to take it down. Next day, I returned to the school, my heart racing as I prepared to confront Karen. I had spent the night going over every detail with Sarah, ensuring we had all the facts lined up. We had enough evidence to take her down, and I wasn't about to let her slip through my fingers. My mind was clear, but the emotional weight of the situation still pressed on me. As a mother, I couldn't help but feel betrayed. By Karen, by the school, and by a system that had failed to protect my daughter. I walked into the school with a determined stride, Sarah waiting outside as backup. Karen was exactly where I expected her to be, in the same office, acting as if nothing had changed. Her ever-present smile was still plastered on her face as she looked up from her desk, clearly pleased to see me. "Mrs. Marshall," she greeted, me with a sickly sweet tone. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon. I hope everything is better with Sophie now." I didn't waste a second. I wasn't here for pleasantries. "Cut the act, Karen. I know everything. I know about Biomed, health supplies, the shady deals, and the faulty medical equipment you've been peddling to this school. You've been using children's lives as a pawn in your game of profit, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." Her smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly masked it with a defensive posture. "You don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Marshall," she said, her voice now tinged with nervousness. "Biomed is a legitimate company. There's been some confusion, yes, but it's nothing more than that. Don't lie to me," I shot back, my voice low but sharp. "I've seen the reports. I've seen the whistleblower accounts. Biomed has a long history of supplying defective equipment to schools just like this one. You've been part of it from the beginning, haven't you?" Her eyes darted to the door, and I could see the fear creeping in behind her cold exterior. She knew I had her, and there was no way out. But instead of crumbling, Karen dug in her heels, a smile slowly returning to her face. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just trying to help. The school needed a solution, and Biomed provided it. What was I supposed to do? They gave us a discount. Why wouldn't I take advantage of it? I could feel my blood pressure rise as I listened to her try to justify her actions. She was no longer trying to cover up her involvement. Now she was defending it. It was as if she honestly believed that because she was saving the school money, everything else was excusable. But it wasn't. Lives had been put at risk. Sophie had been put at risk. "No, Karen," I said, my voice steady despite the rising anger in my chest. "You didn't just take advantage of a discount. You compromised children's health for your own financial gain. You knowingly put defective products into the hands of people who trusted you, and you didn't care who got hurt in the process." The silence in the room was suffocating. Karen's expression had completely changed. Now, the smugness had vanished, replaced by a mixture of fear and realization. She knew it was over. She knew she had been caught. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her guilt. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought—" "No," I interrupted, stepping closer to her. "You weren't doing the right thing. You were doing the wrong thing, and now you're going to face the consequences." At that moment, I could feel the shift in power. Karen was no longer in control. I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to let her slip away again. I pulled out the file Sarah and I had compiled, all the damning evidence against Karen and Biomed. I set it down on the desk in front of her, letting her see exactly what she had done. "This is your future, Karen," I said, my voice cold. "You've crossed the line, and there's no going back. I'm taking this to the authorities. You'll be investigated and you'll face the charges that come with it. But I won't stop there. I'll make sure the whole community knows what you've done." Karen's face was ashen, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of true fear in her eyes. She knew the game was up. She knew her life was about to come crashing down around her. I stood up, my heart still pounding in my chest. But I felt a strange sense of relief. This was only the beginning. The wheels of justice were turning, and no one was going to stop them. It wasn't long after Karen's confession that the wheels of justice began to turn swiftly. The school board was forced to take immediate action. Within days, an official investigation was launched, and Karen was placed under scrutiny. Authorities raided her office, seized documents, and began examining the full extent of her involvement with Biomed Health Supplies. It wasn't just a case of negligence or incompetence, it was a full-fledged operation to profit off the lives of vulnerable children. And Karen wasn't the only one involved. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that her network spanned far beyond the walls of the school, extending into several other districts. What had initially seemed like an isolated incident was now a large-scale fraud scheme that had impacted countless families. The news of Karen's arrest and the scandal that followed spread like wildfire. The media was relentless, covering every detail of the case. Stories appeared on local news stations, newspapers, and social media platforms. I could barely keep up with the constant stream of messages, calls, and interviews. People wanted to know how something like this could happen. How could a trusted volunteer, someone who was meant to look out for children, turn into the orchestrator of such a dangerous and deceitful plot? I tried to keep it together for Sophie. She was recovering, physically at least. The oxygen therapy had worked wonders, and her breathing had stabilized. But there was a darkness lingering beneath the surface, something that no amount of medical treatment could heal. The emotional toll on both of us was immense. Sophie had always been a strong, resilient child, but even she couldn't fully comprehend the depths of what had happened. She knew she had almost been harmed, but the fear in her eyes when she spoke about the balloon instead of the oxygen tank haunted me every day. It was as though she could never truly forget that moment, and I wasn't sure how to help her move on. As for me, the weight of the situation was overwhelming. There were days when I could barely get out of bed, my thoughts consumed by what could have happened to Sophie. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her struggling to breathe, gasping for air, her face turning blue. The memory was imprinted on my mind, a constant reminder of how close we had come to losing her. But there were also moments of clarity, moments when I reminded myself that I had fought for her. I had stood up when no one else did. I had taken action, and now Karen was being held accountable. Still, victory felt bittersweet. I had exposed the truth, but I couldn't shake the anger, the frustration, and the deep sense of betrayal that gnawed at me. How had Karen been able to deceive so many people? How had the school allowed this to happen under their watch? My anger wasn't just directed at Karen. It was directed at the entire system that had failed Sophie and countless other children. The system that had allowed greed to override common sense and safety. The same system that had placed profit over the well-being of our kids. As the media continued to cover the story, I became something of a local hero. People came to me with their stories, their own experiences with Karen or similar incidents. Teachers, parents, even students all shared their fears and frustrations. It felt like the entire community was reeling from the shock of what had happened. They wanted to know how I had uncovered the truth, how I had stood up to Karen, and how they could prevent something like this from happening again. But with the media attention came unwanted scrutiny. Some people hailed me as a hero, while others accused me of blowing the situation out of proportion. There were even whispers that I had somehow made the whole thing worse than it really was. But I didn't care. I knew the truth. And the truth was that Karen's actions had put Sophie's life in danger. The truth was that I had done what needed to be done to protect my child, and I wouldn't apologize for it. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the pressure that had started to build. My work as a prosecutor was demanding, and now, with all the attention on the case, I found myself juggling even more responsibilities. Interviews, legal paperwork, meetings with investigators. It felt like my life had been consumed by this fight for justice. And yet, despite everything, I never lost sight of what mattered most. Sophie. She was my priority, and I had to make sure that, despite the chaos, she was able to heal emotionally. One of the hardest moments came when Sophie finally asked me about Karen. She had overheard something at school, some conversation between two students about how Karen was being taken away in handcuffs, and it had unsettled her. I sat down with Sophie, trying to explain everything in a way that wouldn't overwhelm her. "Why would she do that, Mom?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide and filled with confusion. "Why did she put me in danger?" I paused, taking a deep breath. I had prepared for this conversation, but no amount of preparation could make it any easier. "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes people make bad choices. They let their desire for money or power take over, and they stop thinking about the people they're hurting. But what matters is that you're safe now. You're going to be okay." Sophie nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She wasn't convinced. And how could she be? Her trust had been shattered. The world that had once felt safe and predictable now seemed uncertain and dangerous. I wished there was a way to make it all go away, to shield her from the cruelty of the world. But I knew that was impossible. The best I could do was help her understand that what happened wasn't her fault. It wasn't because of anything she had done. It was because of someone else's greed and selfishness. The days following the media frenzy were exhausting. The case had become a landmark in the community, and everyone seemed to want a piece of it. I spent hours on the phone with reporters explaining the details of the investigation, giving them the facts they needed, and trying to keep the story focused on the truth. But I had to admit that part of me was overwhelmed by the constant barrage of attention. I wanted to scream, to shut it all down, but I couldn't. Not when there were so many people still being affected by the scandal. Then, the worst part of it all hit me. Karen had tried to reach out. She sent me a letter through her lawyer, begging for forgiveness. In the letter, she claimed that she had made a terrible mistake. and that she never meant for anyone to get hurt. She wrote about how she had been under pressure from the school and from her suppliers, and how she had gotten in over her head. The letter was full of remorse, but I wasn't moved. I couldn't find it in myself to forgive her. Not yet. Not when she had nearly cost my daughter her life. As the investigation continued and more people came forward with their own stories, I knew that the battle was far from over. Karen's arrest was just the beginning. The real work would be ensuring that something like this never happened again. I would fight for that, for Sophie, for the other children who had been affected, and for the families who trusted a broken system. But even as justice was being served, I couldn't escape the feeling that the community had been irrevocably changed. A trust had been broken, one that could never truly be repaired. And in the end, that was the hardest part to accept. In the days following Karen's arrest, life began to shift back to a semblance of normalcy, though the shadows of the past still loomed over me. The legal proceedings took months, but when the HOA verdict finally came, it was as satisfying as it was necessary. Karen was charged with criminal negligence and fraud, the court finding her guilty of endangering children's lives through her reckless actions. She was banned from working at the school, and the authorities ensured that she would never hold a position in any educational institution again. For all the pain she had caused, this was the smallest of the many punishments she would face. But, as much as the conviction brought a sense of justice, I couldn't ignore the emotional toll it had taken on me and on Sophie. Karen's actions had set off a chain of events that would forever alter the trajectory of our lives. Sophie's trust in the system, in the people who were supposed to protect her, had been shattered. The carefree child she once was had been replaced by a more cautious, more guarded version of herself. She had nightmares, struggled with anxiety, and asked questions about why anyone would want to hurt her. And while I could comfort her, I couldn't shield her from the world. What had happened wasn't just about a bad person, it was about a failing system that allowed that person to operate unchecked for so long. But as the months passed, something inside me began to shift. I had started this journey as a mother, fighting for her daughter. But now I found myself transformed into something more. I became an advocate for child safety in schools, using my experience to shed light on the flaws in the system and push for reforms. I began speaking at local town halls, reaching out to lawmakers, and connecting with other parents who had faced similar situations. The voice that had once been silenced by fear and doubt was now loud, unwavering, and determined. The first major change came when I worked alongside a group of parents and child welfare advocates to help pass new laws aimed at improving the safety of children in educational settings. We pushed for regulations that would require schools to conduct thorough background checks on all volunteers and staff, especially those who were involved in the health and safety of children. Additionally, we demanded the creation of an oversight board that would regularly inspect school health supplies and medical equipment to ensure everything met rigorous safety standards. No child should ever be at risk because of negligent decisions made behind closed doors. It wasn't just about preventing incidents like what had happened with Sophie. It was about building a system that genuinely prioritized the well-being of children over financial considerations. We wanted to make sure that no parent would ever have to go through the fear and helplessness that I had felt that day in the health center. We wanted a system where every child's safety was guaranteed, no matter where they lived or what school they attended. As I watched the laws take shape, I knew that it wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for every child whose life could be improved by these changes. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel a sense of peace. The anger and pain that had fueled me for so long were now tempered by the knowledge that I was making a difference. The fight had not been in vain. Sophie, too, began to heal. The nightmares eventually stopped, and she started to find comfort in her friends and in the routine of her life. She would never forget what had happened, but she began to understand that what had occurred was not her fault. She was safe now, and she would continue to be. I made sure of it. But there was something else that had shifted in me, something even deeper than the legal battles or the reforms. Through it all, I had learned the true power of resilience. When everything had seemed lost, when I felt helpless and alone, I had found the strength to stand up and fight, not just for Sophie, but for every child who might be vulnerable. The fight for justice had brought me to a place where I no longer felt like a victim. I was a survivor, a warrior for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Looking back, I realized that redemption didn't come from the conviction of Karen or the passage of new laws. It came from within. It came from the decision to rise above the trauma and use it as fuel to change the world. It came from knowing that no matter how hard things got, I would always be there for Sophie, and that I would never stop fighting for her, no matter the cost. Sophie and I had been through hell together, but we were stronger for it. We were more than just survivors. We were fighters, advocates, and champions of justice. And together, we moved forward, knowing that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but also with hope. I had done my part, and in doing so, I had found peace. The redemption I had sought wasn't just about bringing Karen to justice. It was about reclaiming our lives, our safety, and our future. In the end, justice had been served, and we were safe. And for the first time in a long while, I could breathe. Easy. For more stories of justice, resilience, and truth, make sure to subscribe to the HOA stories. Stay informed, stay empowered, and together, we can shed light on the hidden truths that need to be told. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated with every new story. Join us in the fight for justice, because every story matters,